Okay, this is the second video of Machiavelli week. And I guess I didn't mention it in the other video, but I guess I'm going to have to say it just in case. But there's a study guide. There's the quiz dates are there. The reading links are there. And the video links are there. What else? You can use the study guide for the quiz as well. Right, and it's all there in module 2, which should be ready by the time you wake up on Monday. Okay. All right, so let's continue. So the previous video went up to chapter 6. Let's look at chapter 8. And here I'm pretty much going over all of the terms and also setting up a little bit of a kind of a discussion thing at the end here. Okay, so chapter 8. We get into some of the meaty stuff of Machiavelli. The title of the chapter is Coming to Power Through Wicked Actions. And interestingly, he says that the acquisition of power can happen through wicked actions. Like you can kill lots of people, and he does give a couple of examples of this. But there's no glory. Like you don't get a good reputation. People don't remember you fondly. In other words, you can do lots of horrible things, even kill lots of people, but if you do it well, then you have a great reputation, right? So people, and the added benefit is that people are afraid of you and they respect you. And so this is what's kind of interesting about Machiavelli, is that he talks about the benefits of having people afraid of you. Now, he's not a fan of naked violence, right? Just open aggression, uh, because it's easy to see. But if you do it well, and that's where that well-used cruelty comes in, as opposed to cruelty abused, right? So basically, he's saying when you come into power, make a list of all the people you want to kill them all at once, right? Just get it all done, and then never do anything. Don't kill any more people for the rest of the time that you are the ruler. And so people will be afraid of you because you can take them out. But then the rest of the time you're there, you're going to reward, you're going to try to show people how much of a great person you are. And that's what people are going to remember, all the great things that you did for them, which is kind of interesting because a lot of people don't even realize just how many people the president of the United States has ordered killed, right? People just don't. We'll get into that a little bit. And that's the one thing that a lot of uh, anti-war people liked about Trump, is that instead of starting new wars, although he did have a missile attack in there, but instead of starting new wars, he tried to have peace treaties. And apparently he had a bunch of them there. He went over to North Korea, right, to try to meet with people and try to take steps towards peace instead of constantly calling them dictators, evil dictators that we have to take out, you know. And that bothers a lot of people who hate Trump. But the reality is that Obama started a bunch of wars. So did Bush, obviously, and Clinton. He had his fair share of overseas killing as well. Whatever. So one might say that's well-used cruelty, right? So a lot of people don't even think about all of the death and destruction that happens overseas. And if it does happen to Americans here in America, no one really cares. So that'd be a piece of well-used cruelty. But Machiavelli says, yeah, you keep doing that openly with naked violence, people are not going to like it. Sorry. Excuse me. Chapter 17. He says, you know, if you had to choose between being loved by the people, this works for parenting as well, maybe. If you had a choice of being loved by the people or being feared by the people, you got to go with fear, right? Because love changes. People fall out of love all of the time, but also people are fickle, as we saw in the earlier video, as we talked about. People change their minds all the time. You cannot predict it either. You can't even know when you offended someone or got someone upset. And so what might have been love or favorable feelings turns into hate. So what you need, if you're going to have to choose between the two, you have to go with fear. But see, the thing is, getting people to fear you is one thing, but you can't go too far so that they hate you. And there are lots of problems of being hated. And I think we get into that in chapter 19. So again, you don't want to be so loving that people think that they can take advantage of you. You don't want to do that. So you want people to fear you, uh, but love is just kind of an added benefit. If you have it, great. But if you don't, that's okay, because people fear you. But what you want to always avoid is being hated. And I don't know. It's interesting why people might want to hate Trump, considering, when I look at a lot of the stuff that people were saying were justifiable reasons for hating him. Yeah, it didn't really pan out. This is kind of interesting. But anyway, um, chapter 18. Did I say 18? That was chapter 17. This is 18. He talks about, how honest does a ruler have to be? How far do you have to go to keep your promises? What's the exact title name? Uh, uh, how far rulers are to keep their word. So if I made a promise to you, do I keep that promise? Obviously not. If when it doesn't work in your favor, you can't keep that promise, right? So in other words, you keep the promise only if it doesn't jeopardize you staying in power. Because remember, that's the goal of a ruler, to stay in power, not just for that person to stay in power, but to be able to pass off the rule to their children, right? So you want to keep it in the family kind of thing. And so how do we do that? How do we rule over this territory so that everyone kind of, is afraid of you? And when you say, oh, my son, usually it's son, is going to be the next ruler, people say, oh, that's a great choice, that kind of thing. So how do we have that kind of conclusion? So we talk about integrity. Integrity is the ability to stick with your principles. Like, I will never break my promise unless I'm going to get screwed by keeping this promise, right? So what is the level of honesty, or the willingness to stick to a principle, right? That's integrity. So integrity, people would say, is honesty, but one might say is being true to the principle that you say you subscribe to, right? So is it that it's always the Eagles unless they lose all the time? How true are you to your beliefs and principles? So that would be integrity. And then he says, so a ruler then has to be like an animal. He has to be like, I keep using he because they generally were all male, with some notable exceptions, but foxes and lions. So you have to be sly like a fox, but vicious like a lion. So a lion is strong, defeats enemies, don't, generally speaking, okay, it's top of the food chain kind of thing, but not very bright. Okay. So you have to have that brute strength, the ability to take people out, to kill people, but you also got to be smart like a fox. But so you can't just be a fox though, because the fox always gets eaten by the wolves, right? So you have to have both. You have to be both a fox, really sly, sneaky, smart, wise, whatever, and you have to be a lion. So you have to go to war if you have to. You have to kill those kids if you have to. If the situation calls for it, no, like don't back off from what you need to do in order to stay in power. And he gives some examples of that, of people who's like, oh, I can't do that, and then they lost power. Okay. And then he says something really interesting. because we're talking about manipulating people, lying to people, breaking your promises to people. And he's like, it's okay. Just go ahead and do that because people want to be deceived. People want to be fed hope, false hope, for them to say, oh, yeah, yeah, they're going to do this. And you're always disappointed, right? You're always going to be disappointed because they never do what they actually say because it's impossible, right? You can promise all these things. And if they fulfill their promise, things are always going to be bad. And if they don't fulfill the promise, well, now you're upset. And so the thing is, Machiavelli is saying, don't worry about it because people want to be deceived. Now, just so, to point out, when I was a lot younger, maybe even in high school, and I listened to a couple speeches here and there, and I heard all the promises, pie in the sky, everything is like, and then when they become president, nothing ever happens. All the things they promise, they don't do. And so it was right then that I said, well, they're a bunch of liars. And so why should I even bother listening to the lies, like what promises they're going to break in the future? So, you know, I checked out of politics when I was in high school and didn't plug in again until 2011. Just so you know, because what's the point? I mean, they're all going to break their promises anyway. And so he says too, you only have to have the appearance of having positive qualities like being compassionate. You just have to look like you do. And I think that's kind of interesting because that's all people want. So I don't know, I don't listen to presidential debates, but back in 2012 when I did, and I listened to the news commentary, they said, oh, he looks presidential, he looks like he has the stuff that it takes. And I'm like, what is that, what you're going by? Is this like high school all over again? It's kind of very interesting. So no one really cares about what they say, they just care what you look like. Care about what you look like, and this is just it's just absolutely horrible. And you might be one of those people who thinks this way. Uh, Gut check time, right? So, do they really have the qualities that you think they have, or you just want to believe that they have those qualities? And chances are, doesn't matter what president it is, they just look like they have uh, those qualities. I mean, if you look at Biden too, seriously, I just read a report. Someone say he's being briefed daily about this or that, and I'm like, really? Like, do you really think he's awake when you're talking about something? I don't know. I just think he's just so old and that I don't think his mind is all there. So it's kind of disturbing that people are going to ignore that and just say, oh, no, no, he's the best candidate. It's kind of interesting. Chapter 19. Uh, so if a new prince has to fear the subjects, the people he's ruling over, and other countries. Now, the thing is, you always have to be afraid of other countries, especially if you're not too sure how to make allies or who to be allied with. But even if someone does attack you, if you have the people backing you up, right? If the people are going to support you, they like you, and all those other kinds of, then you have less to fear. But if the people hate you, then they're going to conspire against you, right? They're going to try to think of all these different ways of you know, coming after you, undermining your power, making it impossible for you to get anything done, all this kind of stuff, right? And so you want to avoid hatred, because that's what really gets a lot of people going. So love is one end of the spectrum, but hate also gets people going in a way that you don't want them to do so. So what do you do when there's something really awful that you have to do to stay in power, but you can't do it? Otherwise, people will hate you. You delegate. You make someone else do it. Back in Reagan's term, he wanted to sell drugs for guns, or I forget how it goes. The Iran Contra affair, right? So I don't even really remember the details. So Ollie North, he was one of the guys there. And so by that time, Reagan was so old, he's like, oh, I don't remember. And they was like, oh, dementia, you can't remember anything. And so he got out of it a lot. But you delegate, you make someone else do it, so then they take the fall. And so when everything goes sideways, that person gets the blame. Okay, and that's how you keep people loving. Oh, it isn't my favorite president who did something immoral or did something so horrible that I'd have to start disliking him. No, it was his underlings, and they did it without him knowing. Oh, it's so awful. And that happens all of the time. And so in politics, whenever something really shady is about to happen, they always pre-pick the fall guy, right? The person who's going to take the blame. And chapter 21, in order to build your reputation, you have to do great undertakings, right? So every president tries to do something which will be their signature law or their signature legacy, whatever. And so for Obama, it was Obamacare, right? Trump, what was his legacy? Surviving Russia? I don't know. What his greatest accomplishment was. I think his greatest accomplishment was not starting any new wars, but then that doesn't sell very well for the history books, for history teachers, for pro big government people. It's like, oh, that's not doing anything, not starting any wars. But for us, people like me, that's everything, right? Ending the hate, the killing overseas. And very curiously, at the end of chapter 1, he says, you have to preserve peace so that the people can prosper. The more unrest, the more rioting, the more, just civil unrest. Also, the more that the government increases taxes, writes new laws, people are unwilling to do business. And that is bad for the economy. The people then get very upset. They become very poor, which makes them even more upset. And so you have to really be careful, right? So, overview, Machiavelli's goal is to try not only to get a job, but he's trying to show that he can give really good advice so that a prince will stay in power, because that's what the goal is of a ruler, is to stay in power. There's a saying that House of Representative has a 2-year term. So as soon as they get elected, what do? They start campaigning for re-election. So what you have to realize is that most politicians, most of the time that they spend in government is preparing for re-election, right? Because that re-election cycle comes around very, very quickly. So you constantly have to figure out, well, what can I campaign with? What good things do I have to do while I'm in office so that I can use it to get reelected? So at the next part of the study guide, I have here a couple of discussion topics that I usually would bring up in class if we're face to face. But why is it that so many voters in America just believe what politicians say? Uh, I think I mentioned this earlier. How do you know a politician is lying to you? Their lips are moving. So if they lie so much, why is it so many people go out and trust and vote for so many politicians? Why do they do that? And the reason is because they're socialized to think only in terms of issue, not principle. Okay. So the 2 rules of the class that I gave you, those are principles: no coercion, no hypocrisy. That's not only a rule, but it's also a principle. Uh, but an issue is to try to learn what the right answer is when it comes to racism, when it comes to poverty, when it comes to, I don't know, welfare, war, whatever, right? They give you a problem and they tell you what the right answer is. And so if your candidate says that right answer, you say, that's the person I'm voting for. But let's just take homelessness, for example. So as you know, there are certain cities that have a huge homeless problem, right? San Francisco being one is the one I'm thinking of. Tent cities everywhere. And Philadelphia is beginning to grow one as well. Well, if you want to be a compassionate politician, you say, oh, we will increase spending to take care of all these homeless people, right? Now, if I was running for mayor, I would say, let's bring in some of this fast build technology, provide housing for all of the homeless, dirt cheap, solved. But see, that's the thing. You don't get votes that way, right? Because none of the unions would vote for me. I would not get any of the support of the unions. I wouldn't get support from all of the people who would have gotten a job to take care of the homeless problem. See, what a lot of people don't understand is that in government, you have to have the problem in order to keep your job. If you solve the problem, you lose your job. So the goal is never to solve the problem. Generally, the goal is to make it worse. So San Francisco, ever since they tried to start to solve the homeless problem, it's gotten a lot worse. Yeah, because if they solve it, then all of the homeless people, all of the politicians, bureaucrats who are hired to deal with the homeless problem, they don't have a job anymore. And so what are you going to do now? You got to perpetuate it. You got to perpetuate the problem so you keep your job. And that's focusing on the issue. If you focus only on what should be the right answer when it comes to a certain phenomena, then you're going to have stuff like this. But if you use a principle, if you say, well, what honesty or letting people decide for themselves, giving people more choices, right? If you go with a principle like that, then anything a politician says, you just judge it by that criteria, right? If a politician says we must provide healthcare, what does that mean? I'm going to give you fewer choices, right? And so if you're like, well, wait a minute, that goes against the principle of having more choices, so I can find something that I actually like. This person is saying, I'm going to give you fewer choices. Bad, right? So it's not about what the socialized right or wrong answer is. It's what principle works best, not just for you and your own political perspective, but for everybody, for as many people as possible, right? And when you start looking at things in terms of principle, you start getting very, very different critiques and evaluations and conclusions. So the ends justify the means, not really what Machiavelli is all about. Like I said before, it's about staying in power. So why did the Pope ban the book? Because the church is political as well, especially in those days when if someone stepped out of line, like the Protestant Reformation, that the Pope would send the papal armies to go and kill everyone who is engaging in heresy that is going against the church. And so a lot of the Protestant reformers had to suit up. They had to strap on the sword and defend their city against the papal army. And it got pretty bloody. So the Pope bans the book because he doesn't want people to realize what the rules of the game are, right? How the game is played, the amount of corruption, the amount of breaking of promises, the amount of manipulation that goes on, the backroom promises that go on. A lot of you may have been following the whole GameStop thing, but the SEC, who's supposed to monitor and watch over the stock market, are made up of former CEOs. I mean, a lot of these, it's called regulatory capture, but basically they say, well, in order to have a regulatory agency, you need to get experts of the field on that agency. And of course, they're insiders who still have relationships with the people they used to work with. And so they feed them information or they get favors asked of them. And so they don't cater to the little people, me and you. They cater to the needs of the corporations, which is why we don't need oversight agencies. We don't need, government agencies trying to look out for our safety, because they're not. They're looking out for the safety and protection of large corporations. Okay. So that's the thing. So Machiavelli is basically laid out all of the rules that they play by: lie, uh, break promises, kill lots of people if you have to, everything to stay in power. And he gets a little technical, okay, but the idea is that all of his advice is geared towards staying in power, not about the safety and well-being of the people. I mean, that's sort of an afterthought. but it's do what needs to be done in order for you to stay in power, even if it's something very brutal. You got to do it. If you are truly virtuous, right? If you're really skillful, then you'll do it, right? And so the church, very political. I'll even go so far as to say that even every family is political, right? So when someone says, "Oh, don't ever say this in front of dad," he'll just get so angry. What are you doing? You are engaging in politics. So it happens on everywhere, any organization, any business. If there's more than one person in that business, there's going to be politics. Okay. And so it doesn't matter what business it is, what religious institution it is, there's always going to be politics. And so the politics are governed by rules. So what are the rules? Being ignorant of the rules kind of leaves you in the cold. But if you know what the rules are, then you can understand more of why people are doing what they do. Just another thing I forgot to say in the Bordeaux video, but in case any of you ever find yourself in the corporate world or in a working in a business, some people get promotions faster than others. Now, why is that? Because they know what the rules are, right? Not just come to work on time, but they know how to play the game in such a way that they get ahead of you. Most people would say, "Oh, I'm just getting my paycheck. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. I'm doing what I'm told." Yeah, see, that's why you're not on the fast track. People who are on the fast track, they not only understand or what their role is, what their job description is, but they know the rules of the field, right? Just something to keep in mind. Uh, let's see, politics versus the use of force. Machiavelli is not a big fan of it. He's saying, well, if you got to do it, this is when you got to do it, right? Well used cruelty, but you can't overdo it. You can't abuse it. In the same way, too, in our society, if you push too hard, see, one thing that a lot of people are missing right now in their celebration over, the whole Donald Trump thing, is they don't understand how people are so angry, why people are so angry. And if you ignore it, it'll just get worse. Same thing when Trump was in office, a lot of people sort of blew off, a lot of Democrats who were upset that he was in office. They're going to get mad. They're going to get angry. They're going to conspire to try to get rid of him. So Machiavelli, knowledge production for leaders, people who want to rule other people. And generally speaking, this is pretty much how they're going to do it. Now you might say, no. Yeah, I say, yeah. I've been in church and I've seen organizations like a large, what do you call it, collaborative, sort of cooperative groups of churches, right? Oh, there is an insane amount of politics that goes on there. So it doesn't matter. There's politics everywhere. Let's see. So for us to read this book wasn't ever supposed to happen. Like we weren't. That's why the Pope banned it, right? That's why it was on the banned book list, because we're not supposed to know how the game is actually played. Now you might say, "Oh, Dr. Kim, you whatever," but no. And as we were going over the chapters, I was trying to get you to realize that, yeah, this is what happens. Sometimes America, follows that advice, and a lot of times they don't. And look what happens every single time they ignore what is probably the best option, the best choice to behave. Uh, Also, what Machiavelli points out is the accountability of government. That right now, the way the government is, they just do whatever it is they do. There is very little recourse. With a stroke of a pen, now certain behaviors are criminalized, certain behaviors are legalized. Why? This is the one thing that Machiavelli cautioned at the end of chapter 21. Don't change the laws so much. Don't keep changing things up, because now business people won't know what to do. And you might say, well, I hate business people. Well, you love Amazon, and so do the Democrats or government in general. And so what you begin to see is uh, fewer and fewer choices. Mom and pops disappearing, right? So because of Corona, 60% of small businesses had to shut down, never will reopen again. Amazon got bigger, right? So the large, powerful corporations are being protected by the government. And so all of their small competitors, the mom and pop stores, are going out of business. This is very, very bad, right? So we have fewer choices, fewer options, and now we have to go with the government option, who the government picked, right? So even with Twitter, right, there was another competing platform. I forget, it was on the tip of my tongue, but they were shut, they were deplatformed because a lot of conservatives were leaving Twitter, and they said, oh, can't have that. And so what's happening is you're being forced to choose from the choices that the government wants you to have, which is a very, very bad thing. And so the next thing that I have, and they're not held responsible. So all of the policies that they did that were very costly, that destroyed all these other, personally, if 60% of the businesses were closed, I think the politicians should be taken to task. I think they should be held accountable. Like money should come out of their deep pockets, right? Because they are very, very wealthy. And so they should be, I'm not tax money. I'm talking from their own personal funds, in the same way that a CEO has to be punished if they're found guilty of something, right? Well, politicians as well. And if that was the case, if that's what happened, then there would be a little bit more integrity, I think, on the political level. Let's see. So the best ruler, who would be the best ruler of your life? It's yourself, right? You are the best ruler. You're the one that knows your needs and wants and desires better than anyone else. So what right does a government have to come and tell you how you should live your life? I think none. Uh, but Machiavelli kind of hints at that. He says, look, you can't screw people's lives up, right? Because they're autonomous, they're individuals. You can't mess with their freedom. Uh, and if you do so, then you're not going to stay in power very long. And that's the thing. Right now, the United States is stepping on, whether the Republicans are in government or the Democrats, they're stepping on everybody. And if that's the case, they can't be in power for too long. All right, so I'm going to end this video here, and then I'm going to go over that list of links I have on the study guide. I'll see you in the next video.